on Calvinism will hopefully justify any Calvinist reading of the times should be good. Okay, let's see, where are we here? Yes, Professor Miriam Grijelsammer. Grijelsaamer, sorry. Will speak on the Bible in hiding, a Calvinistic didactic manual. The Bible in hiding, a Calvinistic didactic manual concealed in a 16th century spiritual testament.
I feel as a real journalist now.
Our in-house panel.
You didn't come for nothing. After a good American accent and a good German accent, you will have a French accent. No historian would have taken any interest in Louis Porquin, a merchant who immigrated from Piemonte to the Low Countries. אתה מפריע לי. Had he not published in 1563 a book for his children, written in Dutch rhetorical verses. Its first part, the memory book, you see, no, could you close the light? Yeah, you see something? It's okay? Okay. The first part, the memory book, was believed by traditional historiography to be one of the earliest examples of the ego literature in the Low Countries, since it described Porquin's prestigious genealogy and his life as a nobleman. I discovered that Porquin was not what he pretends to be in his memoirs, but worked in moneylending, an occupation banned to Christians and then by the church. After he became one of the richest men of the town of Middelburg, which is here in Holland today, money was no more his ultimate goal, but his own social status. Ennobled by Charles V in 1553, he moved 3 years later from Middelburg, where he owned until his death a lending table, to the town of Bergen op Zoom, which is here in Brabant, pretending there to be a noble patrician living off the incomes of his land. In short, I found out that the goal of his memoirs is to falsify his past, as he never intended to write his real autobiography, but on the contrary, to hide his forbidden activities as a moneylender. Moreover, I have proven that these memories were not written as he pretends by himself, but by a ghost writer. The second part of his book, called The Last Testament, this is the first page, but you don't see, do you see something? Yeah? Okay. Appears as a pedagogic guide for his children and gives general teachings contained in a more personal literary frame, like the Decameron, for example. It includes many pious directives, traditional words of wisdom commonly found in medieval and early, modern, learned, and popular culture. This part was reprinted over and over again and used for more than 200 years by the masters of elementary schools in the Low Countries to teach reading and writing and to educate their pupils. This famous didactic book was considered by traditional historiography to be an original Renaissance educational manual. In fact, what we have here is a subversive text that secretly conveys the basic principles of the Calvinistic faith. This book is not original at all, as its anonymous writer introduced in it a hidden Calvinistic message exclusively based on carefully selected quotes of a forbidden Dutch translation of the Bible. For instance, it begins by these words, "Hear, my children, the instruction of your father, for I give you a useful doctrine, and if you keep my commandments, you shall live," which is no more, in fact, than Proverbs 4:1. You have the Proverbs there. I'm continuing. Moreover, it was produced in Antwerp by underground Protestant artisans who voluntarily included a coded iconography with a hidden Calvinistic message. They produced it, in fact, for Calvinistic school teachers in order to teach young children under the cover the basic elements of the new religion. What is mostly striking is that the Testament was tremendously successful, as it was adopted after Porquin's death in 1575 as a school textbook in all the Low Countries. Nobody ever paid attention to the fact that it was used simultaneously in the small schools of the Catholic parishes and in those with a Calvinistic orientation. After the secession of 1579, we find it in use in the northern provinces, which were mostly Calvinistic, as well as in the Catholic southern Low Countries, where the church and the state cruelly persecuted the Protestants. There, the elementary schools became the prime weapon of the Counter-Reformation against so-called heresy. This double appropriation was not short-lived. The Testament was still in use in the South in the second half of the 17th century. In the North, new editions of the text were published until at least 1726. How can we explain that this didactic guide was used simultaneously by these two conflicting religions? The first clue to this enigma came by accident, as one of my colleagues teaching Jewish history saw my edition of the text of the memory book. And he told me that he loved the wood engraving of the Passover celebration, Seder Pesach, which appears on the front page of my book. This is, of course, a real Seder Pesach. You know. I suddenly realized that images can sometimes be perceived in totally opposite ways. The Gestalt theory clearly states that the reality of what it calls multi-stable perception of images, that is, that drawings can be sensed very differently by several viewers. So what do you see here? Do you see people or do you see a tree? And here, do you see a vase or two women's shadows? And here, do you see two beggars or a general and not a dog but his hand? And here, do you see a witch or a young girl? Analyzing Porquin's text and his iconography and trying to solve the enigma of its double appropriations by Catholics and Protestants, I identified three different levels of meaning. First of all, Porquin's hidden personal and private purpose to publish his testament was, as he was a moneylender, doomed by the church to beg individually for God's mercy in order to obtain with his book his personal salvation, according to the Devotio Moderna. By writing a casual spiritual testament with impersonal quotes of the sacred scriptures, Porquin aimed to be seen as a Catholic, asking rhetorically for God's salvation, as was fashionable in the 16th century, in order to prepare one's own good death. But in fact, his omnipresent fear of eternal death hides behind those biblical formulas, which falsely seem conventional. The biblical quotations begging for God's forgiveness allow this moneylender to disguise his terror and his yearning for forgiveness for his terrible sin of usury. The front illustration that you see here reveals clearly the twofold intentions of the Lombard: to educate his children. You see something? Yeah? Okay. And reach paradise. The paterfamilias is seen sitting in front of a reading stand which bears his family coat of arms. Here. He reads his spiritual testament to his children who stand with obedience and respect, with their mother encouraging his teaching. On the table we see a human skull here and a sandglass memento mori. The two other engravings illustrate the Lombard's obsession for salvation. A miniature that you can see here at the beginning of the Testament represents him kneeling in front of God, the Father, who rises out of a cloud and seems to grant him absolution. And Porquin writes to his children, I want to leave you my good spiritual will, because divine inspiration is more valuable than all the gold and precious stones of the world. He's a moneylender. Or as we know his terrible secret, we understand very clearly. As we know his terrible secret, we understand very clearly what stands behind this apparently secret. Behind this apparently trivial text and its illustrations. Another engraving confirms his secret goal. Porquin appears in a meadow, bearing a black velvet coat, kneeling down in the position of supplicant, with his wife and children, as his book is offered to God, placed on the reading stand, which bears his coat of arms. This image reminds us of many portraits of Catholic donators in Flemish or Italian paintings. Now let's have a deeper look at the content of Porquin's last will. A short analysis reveals clearly that a very subversive message is hidden in it. It is obvious that a subtext has been inserted on purpose by the man who wrote this text for Porquin, of course without the knowledge of the moneylender. The title reveals that a certain, it's written here, Antonius Verensis did rhyme the prose text written by Porquin. This mysterious man most probably wrote the whole text, taking advantage of the ambiguity of certain formulas in order to introduce allusions to the Protestant doctrine. Only well-informed readers could discover his manipulation. If Porquin probably never detected this second voice within his own book, it is because as a layman he was unable to understand all the nuances of the text that was written for him in Dutch. Even learned readers did not see this stratagem, as the spiritual will was submitted repeatedly as every book during the Counter-Reformation to the harsh scrutiny of censors in the Low Countries, and received their endorsement. You have here examples of these approbatur, 1588 and another one 1608. How can we explain that the harsh Catholic censors never detected the subversive contents of the book and its illustrations? The circumstances of the production of this book explain how Porquin's own choices were capital in contributing to his own mystification. First, the moneylender asked around 1560 famous Antwerp artists to compose his book. When this city was not only a major cultural and commercial metropolis with a cosmopolitan character, but the most revolutionary center in the Low Countries. Secondly, the milieu of the artisans who produced his book is precisely where Calvinism was predominant. More specifically, the fact that Porquin asked a Christian rhetorician poet to write his book had crucial consequences. Subversive religious ideas were widespread in the so-called chambers of rhetoric, and a great number of the members of these literary clubs had strong reformist beliefs. Because of the persecution by Spanish and church authorities, Calvinism was mostly clandestine then. Therefore, the subversive content of Porquin's Last Testament could only appear in disguise, exactly as other crypto-Protestant texts at the same period. Porquin decided to print the book in Antwerp, not only the main center of book printing in Europe from the 16th century on, but from 1520, the most important center of diffusion for European Protestant literature. By asking there the printer Ahmet Tavernier to publish his book, he opened the door, to its manipulation. The printer convinced him to print it in fancy Flemish civility letters that you can see here, or not see, I don't know if you see something, that he invented himself. This type of letters is linked to the so-called civility movement, which began with Erasmus' Treaty on Civility for Children from 1530. The civility letters had a tremendous ideological impact, as they were mostly used in new school books of Reformed inspiration. Porquin did not perceive at all the implications of his typographic choice. Moreover, Arnold Nicolet, the master engraver of Tavernier, who drew the wood engravings of his book, was intimately connected with the subversive circles in Antwerp. In short, Porquin's book was published in a milieu which was highly seditious. What about the religious content of the text? The ambiguity of the Testament is the consequence of the fact that Porquin did not write it by himself. The ghost writer included on purpose his own religious beliefs. By subtle means, so Porquin's work can be understood in two different ways. The first is strictly Catholic. The second introduces the ideas of the Reformation with the help of carefully chosen biblical quotations. First, the quotations located, you see them here. You see, you have this quotation here, and it's written here. The quotations located as an excerpt to each part of Porquin's book are in fact exhortation to adopt the two basic beliefs of the Reform. The sentence on the front page of the memory book, look into the Father's memory and into the books of the ancestors, corrupts in fact Job 8:8, that doesn't speak about the books of the ancestors. And it dissimulates, in fact, the Reform basic principle of sola scriptura, only the Bible only. As for the quotation in front of the Last Testament, it says, set your house in order, dedicate your life to God, because you are born to die, you will not live, which falsifies Isaiah 38:1, because dedicate your life to God isn't written in Isaiah. We have here a clear reference to the second basic dogma of the Reformation, the sola fide, faith only. Most of the quotations are taken from the Ancient and the New Testaments, with a clear predominance of the Psalms and the Proverbs, which strongly indicates a link with the Protestant movement. The Catholic dogmas never appear in the text. There is no allusion to the Virgin Mary or to the saints. No mention of the purgatory, and a total denial of the operas of the deed's benefit. As you can read, no intercession of the living can change the sentence of the dead. Moreover, a central theme appears like a leitmotif, the assurance of salvation and of the predestination of the chosen, and the gift of free justification based on the promise given by Jesus. We find here, following Calvin's ideas, the total confidence of the Reformed believer who puts himself in the hands of God in contradiction to Catholic beliefs. He swore that your salary will be great, whether you are a man or a woman, so don't fear and don't be anxious, and live piously under the cross banner. Numerous passages of the Testament confirm this orientation. For example, it is explicitly recommended to pray in the bedroom after having carefully closed the door. Is it only because of the spirit of the Devotio Moderna, which recommends to have a direct and intimate relation with God? Or maybe do we find here an advice given to the Calvinist convert to be extremely careful when he secretly prays at home? A last example, we find the following recommendation. Go to church, listen to the sermons very carefully, because human life is based not only on eating bread, the Eucharist, but on the Word, since according to the Holy Scriptures, blessed are those who listen to God's Word. This is another very clear reference to the Scriptures' primacy among the Reformers, for whom the Bible should be read and quoted during the predications, contrary to the Catholic Church, for whom sacraments and faith are fundamental. Finally, I will briefly analyze the polysemic meaning of the illustrations of the Testament. The book's illustrations are as ambiguous as the text and hide a disguised message. Its first illustration, and you have here the first illustration of the Editio Princeps, and you have here a Catholic edition of 1608, showing the entire Porquin family perfectly fits the Catholic Church's agenda following the Concilium of Trente, which recommends the use of images to indoctrinate the believers. The faithful Roman Christians see in it an ideal family whose father prepares himself to death and teaches his children the true Catholic doctrine. But a second level of deciphering is hidden in this very same image. Protestantism abolished the hierarchy between clergymen and laymen and underlined the father's role as a teacher. He became responsible for his children's instruction of the new faith, principally based on the Bible. Therefore, a Calvinist eye sees here the representation of a familial reformed cult. Porquin, sitting at the table, is about to, you see it here, but I want to show you this, is about to begin reading the Bible, like in this image, the blessing of the family table by the 17th century French Protestant engraver Abraham Bosse. As it perfectly fits the new social Calvinistic ideal, this image is found in all the Reformed reprints of the Testament. You have here an edition of 1590. Concerning another very popular illustration, the Roman censors saw it as an ideal representation of a devout Catholic family and thus authorized its reproduction in many school books. According to the civility rules adopted by the Counter-Reformation, the believer's physical postures when he prays are an integral part of the cult. I'm finishing. And have a specific meaning. Kneeling means to recognize one's guilt for Christ's death. Lifting up the eyes to heaven means the soul wants to be near its creator, etc., etc. Catholics certainly identified the volume standing on the reading stand as a missal or a mass book. You can find it as the first page illustration of all the editions of the Youth Mirror. No, the Youth Mirror is here. from 1576 to the 18th century. And you have another example of a good Catholic educational book here. But a Protestant eye does not see here Porquin's reading stand, but an altar bearing a Bible. The fact that the religious service takes place outdoors illustrates the so-called wilderness period of the Reformed Church, when public prayers and predications took place in the countryside of the Low Countries because of the persecution and or lack of edifices suitable to the cult. You have here a picture of Bruegel, yes? The predication of St. John Baptist, which represents such predication, 1566. The divine sun rays that you see here could very well symbolize Porquin's predestination by God. Of course, the fact that Porquin's book perpetuated consensual long-term values inspired by the Bible was another reason of its double tremendous success. The so-called monarchic model of the ideal family, including the inferior status of women and the absolute duty of obedience to the pater familias, is common to the entire Christian society since Paul. To sum up, this text, with ambivalent illustrations and religious teachings, all quoted from the Bible, containing a Calvinistic hidden message proclaiming the supremacy of the Bible, paradoxically turned into a pillar of education for many generations, not only of Dutch-speaking Calvinist schoolboys, but of Catholic pupils as well. Thank you.
I suppose we have time for one question. Or, in any case, the next session is very soon. So I suggest that if there are questions, that we should write them in terms of hidden meanings in the Catholic manual and send them over. Letters on the sun?
Yeah, false Hebrew letters, yes. Yeah, you're right. But, you know, it's funny because... לא, זה ממש... אני אומרת, it's false. No. And he tried to do something, but they should be Hebrew letters, yes. You know, people wrote hundreds of articles and some books about this. Nobody saw that these letters are not really Hebrew letters, and nobody, because it was written in general by Catholic Belgian historians, they didn't understand that everything, all this text, it's only quotations of the Bible, not one of them. They wrote about that fantastic Renaissance, revolutionary educational book. Incredible. Nobody, none of them. Because Catholics don't read the Bible. They don't read it.
All right. Thank you very much to all of our presenters. And the next session starts in 10 minutes.